All right, all right, all right, all right, ladies and gentlemen, you're on air now, right? Listen. So, yeah, to begin with, we must first of all give gratitude to God for keeping us to be able to be here this morning. It's very important. On a more serious note, anything you want to do, first of all, give thanks to God, right? Because most of us slept last night. Most people slept last night, they couldn't wake up. Now we are here. God has given us another opportunity for another day to be alive. So, with that alone, it deserves our gratitude. It deserves our praise. Right. And we commit this lecture into His hand. We humbly ask of His wisdom to guide us so that we can be able to understand what we are going to do here today. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for everything. Right. Now, back to what we need to do today. Guys, topic 5, which is risk. I've started last week. It's not so difficult. And I presume you must have done it in other subjects, specifically in operations management or management. You don't do risk in management practice. Right. So, by virtue of what a risk is, perhaps the way risk was conceptualized for you in other subjects might a little bit be different from what we know risk to be as far as project management is concerned. Because in most cases, people associate risk to be something dangerous, something that is no go area, something that people are always scared of. Right. Of course, you've got that element of uncertainty that if it happens, something is going to happen with it as a consequence. So, risk, as you do know, and I know you know, right from your year 2, that risk is an uncertain event that when it happens, it got its own consequential effect. In project management, we don't always consider risk to be dangerous or only dangerous. Let me put it that way for more clarity's sake. In project management, the consequence of a risk can either be positive or negative. Not only that negativity aspect of it that we consider here, because an event can happen or it could happen that can put the project in a more better position. In the same way, it could happen and consequentially compromise the realization of the project objectives. So, by virtue of that, you as a project manager, you must know how to manage risk. And you must know, in the first case, to start with, hello, focus, you should be able to identify risk in your project. Risk in the sense that things that will make you not to be able to achieve what you set out to achieve. Right. Having identified the risk, you've done this in your task, right? Having identified the risk, then you need to do a kind of assessment. Right. What type of assessment? Whether the risk is going to happen or the likelihood of that risk to happen. Then, if it does, What are the impacts? You need to look into the severity of the impact. Is this something that's going to break your neck? Right? You need to check. Right? If it is something that's going to bend your neck, then you need to look for strategies on how to deal with the risk. So that process is what we call risk management. Right. So these are some of the stuff that you are going to come across during the course of this topic. It's very interesting. Then we're going to look into different types of risk, the most commonest type of risk in a general form, right? Okay. Now, risk, I don't need to define it again. We say it's an uncertain event or conditions that if it occurs, it has a positive or negative impact on the project objectives, right? We don't need to start to be wasting, we don't need to waste time there, right? Then, last time I introduced this concept to you, which is very important. You can as well, it's a potential exam question. You can come out here as we call it force margin. Force margin. How many of you have heard this before? Force margin is a French concept borrowed by the English speakers. Force major means what? Major, greater force. So what do we mean by force major? There are certain events that could happen in a project which are beyond your control. No matter how careful you are, no matter how skillful you are in identifying risk, these ones are beyond your control. Right? For example, something that can just happen out of maybe based on nature. Let me put it like that. You don't know what is going to happen in the next few 5 seconds, in the next few hours, or in the next few minutes. Nobody knows what is going to happen. Anything can happen that we don't know about. For example, if we can talk about weather, how it affects the project. Although there are certain aspects of weather that you can be able to make identify as a risk and formulate a risk management plan. But there are certain ones that you cannot control. For example, if there is an earthquake now, nobody knows whether earthquake is going to happen. Remember, there was a time there was a kind of rumbling. I don't know where were you that time? In Cape Town. In the night. Who experienced it? Did you experience that? There was a time like that. Which year was that? 2015 or 2016? Did you experience it? A kind of rumbling, right? They say it was far away in the sea. Yeah, yeah. It was a mini earthquake. We went in the night. Everybody felt it. Yeah, yeah. It was very scary. You know, something of such. Nobody ever thought that things gonna. For example, this earthquake that happens in Venezuela, right? You see how houses in the city, many houses were destroyed. People were trapped. Thousands of people lost their life. In the morning they wake up, some of them go about their businesses to see how they can be able to put food on the table for themselves and their family, but only to go and never return. You see, so perhaps there were construction going on there. So you cannot say because that thing happened, you hold the parties to the contract, to that construction liable. You cannot hold them liable because they were not the cause. So that is what we are trying to say here in terms of liability, right? Liability to obligations, right? So what it means is that it's a kind of a clause that is always inserted in the contract document. which seek to make the parties to a contract not to be liable, right? Whenever there is an event of such, right? Event caused by nature or that is out of nature, which we call force majeure. Do you understand it? Right, that is what we are trying to say here. We said this clause essentially free in every contract, mostly in every contract. Let me put it that way. You see this clause, force majeure. So it frees both parties from liability, right? Or obligation when extraordinary events, such as, like we mentioned just now, earthquake or whatever, or circumstances beyond the control of the parties prevent one or both parties from fulfilling their obligation under the contract. For example, now, let's say you are working on a project here in Atlantis, right? And you'll be given dates, deadline to complete your project. And all of a sudden, there is a case of gangsterism, shooting people all around here, and you could not be able to come to site. And obviously, that will delay your project, right? Will somebody hold you liable for that? No, I said, I'm not the cause of gangsterism here. Why must you hold me liable? You close your site and go home till when situation returns normal. So those kind of stuff can be classified under force majeure, right? So, but when we say force majeure, okay, let me